Chapter 3. About 3 weeks after Jeffrey was born, on the night of March 7th, Angel had woken up to the feeling that someone, other than Eddie, was present. Opening his eyes, he didn't see anyone or anything out of place. With this, even though he knew that it was almost time to get up, by the fact that a street light, out in front of the house, had just flickered on, he decided to cover his face with the cover between himself and Eddie. With the street light now obstructed from his vision, he then closed his eyes and then attempted to doze off again. Moments later, however, his ears caught the padding sound of feet passing his bed. Quickly throwing the cover off of himself, careful to not wake Eddie up, Angel then sat up on the edge of the mattress as his eyes instantly scanned the darkened room. Listening carefully, Angel was able to pick out different sounds from outside and then other noises, within the house, such as the upstairs refrigerator. Filtering out all of the obvious sounds, Angel couldn't hear anything else. Quietly, as Angel continued to listen for anyone breathing, he continued to visually scan the room. Moments later, after passing the whole thing off as being his imagination, Angel then looked back to Eddie as he still slept soundly. Slowly, and carefully, Angel then swung his feet back onto the mattress, laid down on his belly, and then buried his face into the side of Eddie's rib cage and the cover beneath him. Though it had seemed, to Angel, that he had just fallen asleep, he quickly found himself bouncing on the mattress as Eddie was waking up to a new evening. "Are you all right, Angel?" Eddie asked as he stood up beside the bed. Looking down at his roommate, it had appeared to Eddie that Angel was suddenly surprised by his being awake. "You know that it's 10 o'clock now." Then, as Eddie reached down towards the mattress, towards Angel, Eddie almost had gotten the feeling that Angel was perhaps scared of something as Angel simultaneously tried to hide under the blanket. "Angel. What's wrong?" Eddie asked as he quickly sat down on the edge of the mattress. Though both, Eddie and Angel, only wore boxers, they were fluently comfortable with each other's presence. As Angel laid on his chest, Eddie carefully pulled the sheets down off of his little body and then rolled Angel onto his arms to where Angel was now facing upwards. The hair covering Angel's head was jet black as with most Mexicans. His hair was cut short and neatly trimmed around the ears and the back of his head. Angel's skin, a dark golden brown, was smooth and scare-free except for 3 tear marks across his back from about a year prior. Beyond those scars, Angel's body was flawless. For a 10-year-old. Though he stood only 5'2", weighed only 95 pounds, and couldn't grow any hair, other than that grew on his head, nobody would ever guess, much less believe, that the little trembling body was 37 years old. Holding Angel tightly within his arms, Eddie then lightly set Angel onto his lap as he continued to embrace him within his arms. Though Angel wasn't actually crying, his eyes had watered up enough to let loose a single tear that rolled down onto Eddie's bare leg. Eddie had never seen emotions of this sort coming from Angel. If anything, Angel was always the one that had the most backbone and the last one to show fear, sadness, or "Angel. It's alright, buddy. Whatever it is, we can talk about it," Eddie whispered into his ear as he leaned over Angel. Using his hand, Eddie swiped the wet path, caused by the tear, dry as he also carefully placed his own face close to Angel's. Angel's canines, the average size for a vampire, were much more pointed than most. With this in mind, Eddie was carefully as he made himself as close to Angel as he possibly could in order to comfort him. As moments went by without Angel opening up about his fears or sadness, Eddie did feel the trembling, within Angel, begin to dissipate as he also heard Angel begin to pace his breathing. A pace of which Eddie knew was an indication of Angel now being relaxed. With Angel's relaxation, Eddie felt Angel seem to melt into his arms. With this, Eddie sat Angel up, within his lap as they faced one another, and embraced him. "What the hell happened?" Sterling asked. Simultaneously, Sterling looked towards the edge of the bed and saw Eddie holding Angel. "We were coming out of Macaulay's and Lovisa's bedroom, downstairs, and then began to head towards the stairs when a dark figure, a shadow, came out of Mika's room. We stopped when we saw it. It's like it saw us too. It had no face though. Then it went up the stairs, came down the hallway, and then into Angel's and Eddie's bedroom." "And then?" Scott interrupted, Angel He heard the shadow go across the bedroom floor. Looking at Angel, as Eddie held on to him tightly, he then continued, "This thing scared Angel very badly. I've never seen Angel." "It scared Angel?" Sterling interrupted. With his question, Sterling stepped closer to where Eddie and Angel were at on the bed. "Yeah," Lloyd said as he looked towards James, who hadn't said a word. "It scared him badly. That's why Eddie's holding him." With his words, James nodded his head as to verify Lloyd's words. "Well, I think that it would be a good idea to have another seance." Pausing, Sterling kneeled down beside Angel and Eddie to look at Angel's face. "I've never even heard of him being scared of anything. And now, something that he shouldn't have even been able to see in the first place." "Something that none of us should have seen," Scott said. "It was evil." Looking back over his shoulder, as he continued to kneel beside Eddie and Angel, Sterling sorta chewed on his bottom lip as he got real serious. "Where did this thing go?" Without waiting for a response, Sterling then looked back into Angel's face. We don't know." James spoke up. Then, as James spoke, Sterling suddenly jumped back as Angel had suddenly opened his eyes and then looked straight into his. Falling backwards, Sterling caught himself with his hands, preventing himself from falling all the way onto his back. "Find it, Sterling!" Angel suddenly yelled. The sudden outburst nearly caused Eddie to drop Angel onto the floor. Immediately afterwards, however, Eddie regained his grip onto Angel as he then hugged him tightly. Along with Angel's sudden outburst, as Sterling had also finally got back up to his feet, Scott, James, Lloyd, and Sterling had all found themselves staring at Angel in shock. "What did he say?" Lloyd asked. "Exactly what it sounded like," James said as he continued to stare at Angel. "But he's not supposed to be able to." "See us." "I know," James interrupted. "But he wasn't supposed to be able to see that other thing either." "But he did." Pausing as James continued to look at Angel, for some reason he had recalled a similar incident involving Angel. An incident of which involved Angel being able to stare directly at a ghost. And then when Scott died, how did Angel know how to push the envelope for Scott's passing? Almost instantly, James had felt that something was very different about Angel. Not just now. It's like something had always been different about Angel and just now it had been realized. "James, what's going on?" Sterling asked. It had seemed that 1 second, all of the attention was on Angel, and then the following second, all of the attention was on James as he had stopped speaking. "I don't know. Something is just very..." Suddenly, just as James was speaking, a dark shadow had blocked the light from under the door, causing all 4 of the boys, and Angel to look towards the door's silhouette. Very strange. Standing back up and walking away from Eddie's and Angel's side, Sterling walked over to the door, stood there for a minute, and then put his head through the door as he looked down the hallway. There, staring back at him, or what he felt was staring, was the dark shadow in the middle of the hall. At first the figure was motionless but then began to move towards Sterling, and the closed door that he had his head sticking out of. The shadow hovered off of the floor very much the same way as the ghost of the kid that had hit Tommy outside in front of the house, a couple winters prior. Right after the attack, both Tommy and Lucifer had killed the teen and then Sterling ordered the teen's ghost to leave the home. Just like now, just as the kid walked outside of the home's perimeter, his image had turned into a solid dark being that faded off into the nearby shadows. Quickly, Sterling pulled his head back into the bedroom. "It's coming. Watch out, guys." Then, just as the words left Sterling's mouth, the dark image was, once again, entering the room. With its entry, Angel then looked back up as he simultaneously buried himself deeper into Eddie's grip. Instantly, Angel began to violently shake as he then began to openly cry. "Angel." Eddie spoke loudly, "What's wrong with you?" As Eddie looked up towards the bedroom door, just as Angel was, he couldn't see anything that could cause the fear. The more fear that Eddie saw within Angel or felt within Angel, the more worried that he too became. Without a response, Angel just continued to hide himself within Eddie's arms. Malachi, Ronnie, Lucifer, and Tommy. There's something terribly wrong with Angel. Please come and help. Bobby, John, and Macaulay. Please help. Something is wrong with Angel. Tommy had just started his shift for the day. In fact, he had started early, just after sundown, to relieve one of the officers that had plans for the following day that would require an early start. After leaving the police department, he had headed west, on Interstate 40, for road patrol. Maybe 20 seconds or so after he had passed Finley Lane, just within visual sight of the Country General on the north side of the road, Tommy had received an ESP message, from Eddie, saying that something was wrong with Angel. As quick as he could, without causing himself to slide on the ice and cause an accident, Tommy suddenly spun the car around as he then also turned on the overhead lights. City L2. Go ahead L2. Be advised that I'll be 10-8, 1034 to 890 Finley Lane for welfare check. Just as Tommy finished his sentence, he was then also turning left onto Finley Lane and then stomping on the accelerator. 10-4 L2. City clear at 2237. Just as Tommy rounded the top of Finley Lane, he had quickly turned off his overhead lights as he then turned into the driveway. Just as he jumped out of the patrol car, Mr. and Mrs. Bruce suddenly stuck their faces out the front door of their house, as they then watched Tommy run into the front door. As Tommy reached the top of the steps, he had found that Malachi, Ronnie, Macaulay, Lucifer, and Bobby John were trying to all fit into Angel's and Eddie's bedroom as they all crowded in the hallway. What they had found was a very, very scared Angel that was shaking out of control within Eddie's arms. "What's going on?" Malachi asked as he looked in at Eddie. Malachi was the first to arrive at the house and so was already at Eddie's and Angel's bedroom door when his brother and son finally arrived. "Malachi," Eddie said as he looked up to his friend, "I honestly don't know. Angel. He woke up this evening scared to death of something that only he can see. I don't know what's happening." As Eddie spoke, he had also simultaneously used his chin to guard Angel as well as his own arms and legs. "Well," Ronnie spoke up as he stood beside his brother, "if we can't see it, just maybe Sterling, Lloyd, James, and Scott can." As Ron and Malachi stood together, you could see that Malachi was slightly bigger, in weight, compared to his little brother. As they both stood 6'1", Malachi weighed 190 while Ronnie weighed only 160. With both of them having a dark complexion, due to their Hispanic heritage, the only other obvious difference between them is that Ron had bright blue eyes that seemed to almost glow within the half-lit doorway. "Let's all begin a seance, Eddie. Right here in your room." As Ron spoke, Malachi approached Eddie's side and then lightly kneeled down to look at Angel. "Angel," Malachi whispered just loud enough for both Eddie and Angel to hear him. "It's gonna be alright, buddy. But I want you to come to me so that Eddie can do a seance for us." "It's gonna be alright, buddy," Malachi continued as he then put his arms out to Angel. Though it was obvious that Angel had heard and understood what Malachi had said, it was also terribly obvious that Angel was still scared of something that was possibly still within their bedroom. Slowly, Angel reached out towards Malachi's open hands as he had also let go of Eddie's arms. As he moved slowly, Angel's arms were shaking badly. Reaching out towards Angel, Malachi then took a hold of him, under the arms and around the sides of his rib cage, as he had also stood up, with Angel's head rested over his own shoulder. As Malachi then stood straight up, Angel instantly wrapped his legs around Malachi's waist as he then also turned his head so that his face was against the soft tissues of Malachi's neck. Like this, Angel then closed his eyelids tightly. Within the floor space, towards the foot of Angel's and Eddie's bed, Eddie strung out a piece of string into the shape of a star of which he then tacked down with thumb pins. Just outside of the tip of each point of that star, Eddie placed a lit candle and then, after everyone was in the room and seated around the star, Eddie then quickly turned off the bedroom lights and then found his place within the circle. "We gather here today, as the strength of our family, as we serve to protect our family from the seen and unseen." As Eddie spoke, a dim green neon-colored orb began to float in the center of the circle. Now, with the power from within, I ask that Sterling, Scott, Lloyd, and James to all join. We're here, Eddie. Sterling said as his face then showed within the green light, but we're not the only ones here. What do you mean, Sterling? Malachi asked. I don't know how to explain it to you, Malachi. Sterling said as he turned to face Malachi. Through the conversation, Angel never once let go of Malachi nor dared to even open his eyes, but there is another figure in this bedroom with us now as we speak. It won't communicate with us. It is, however, set on terrorizing Angel. For some reason, unknown to us, Angel is able to see this thing. All that I know about it is that it is very evil. Will it come into the circle then? Malachi asked. Just as Malachi asked the question, Sterling then stared into the direction that Angel had been before getting up out of Eddie's arms. Moments later, Sterling then looked back at Malachi. It doesn't look like that it's gonna cooperate with us, Sterling said, and then, again, looked into another direction real quickly before looking back at Malachi. James wants to talk right now, guys. Hold on. Then, just moments later, James's face was within the green light in replace of Sterling's. Hey guys. James spoke as he then quickly turned to look at Eddie. Eddie. I don't know what's going on here, but something is very wrong and at the same time is only affecting Angel. The 5-year-old continued, but there is another way, that you can communicate with this thing. But you'll need an Ouija board or a Pytho board. I've got an Ouija board. Eddie responded. Wait a minute, guys, Malachi said suddenly. What is an Ouija board? An Ouija board and a Pytho board, James began to explain, is a way, like a seance, that you can communicate with the dead. In a seance, however, you cannot communicate with all forms of evil entities. Some evil entities don't arrive from a living human beings. Sometimes, they are a direct product of the devil. And this may be the case. It was going on 11 o'clock at night when Dondi had been waiting on her husband to come back to bed. She had known that something, across the hall, was happening to Angel and was told to remain in bed. Following her husband's directions, she did as she was told and stayed put. To her knowledge, she thought for sure that she hadn't fallen asleep during the 30-some-odd minutes that Bobby John had been gone. Suddenly, however, she heard a sudden noise from the foot end of her own bed. Sitting up real quickly, up onto one elbow, she then turned on the light beside her bed. Elian! Dondi suddenly screamed. Looking back at her, from the foot of her bed, Dondi found her 23-month-old standing within the dark staring directly at her. The looks within Elian's face looked as if he was possessed as he just stared back without a blink. The moment had Dondi petrified as she only could stare back. As James spoke, Dondi's scream could be heard from down the hall. Instantly, however, as Bobby John began to get up, James told him to sit down due to the fact that Scott had just informed him that Elian was in her room to guard her from the evil being. How does Elian know? He's just barely 2 years old. Because, James said, he's a crystal child and therefore is able to sense the dangerous being. Any time that a crystal child senses danger from an evil power, he will guard his mother as she sleeps. The experience, by the mother, can be one of fear as she finds the child staring back at her. And, that's exactly why she just screamed. Scott said as he put his face close to James. So, Malachi spoke up, where do we go beyond the Ouija board? We'll find out, through the Ouija board, what it is that the evil spirit wants with Angel. If you guys cannot comply with what it wants, we might have to go through the process of an exorcism to get rid of it. What's an exorcism? Malachi asked. He had heard of exorcisms but had not entertained himself by learning about them. An exorcism is a way to expel an evil spirit or any other malign influences. It won't hurt Lloyd, Sterling, or I, but it will get rid of this thing. All of a sudden, with the end of James' sentence, the dark shadow moved towards Angel, as Malachi still held onto him, and then suddenly grabbed a hold of the back of Angel's neck. Help! Instantly, Malachi looked down to Angel as he still held him tightly within his arms. Malachi could see what looked like someone wrapping their hand tightly around Angel's neck. It hurts, Angel cried. Malachi. It's got his neck. James yelled. Instantaneously Scott, Lloyd, and Sterling began to yell at the evil being in hopes to distract it. Malachi seemed to attempt to swipe the evil off of Angel's neck, yet found himself to be wasting his time as he saw Angel's neck still being squeezed. Help me, Malachi, Angel cried again. I'm doing what I can, buddy. Malachi ensured. Just keep talking to me. I'm here for ya. Just keep. Let him go, Ronnie yelled very loudly as he stood up behind Angel. Show your strength by picking on someone your own size. You're picking on Angel because you're weak, Ron continued to scream loudly. To everyone else, it appeared that Ron was yelling at something that wasn't there. Scott, Lloyd, James, and Sterling could see otherwise though. You are nothing. All you are is weakness. So, just let him go. Then suddenly, Ronnie was hit by something in the stomach and then picked up off of the floor as everyone else just sat and watched in fear. Simultaneously Angel was let loose as Malachi, once again, regained a tight grip onto him. Let go of my dad, Macaulay yelled as he got up to his feet. James. Isn't there something that you can do? Tommy hollered as he watched in horror as Ronnie dangled in the air. Hey! James yelled at the dark shadow that now held Ronnie. I will have you exorcised out of this home. Leave this family alone. Leave this family alone. Then, in a quiet voice, James looked at Bobby John. Go get some salt right now, Bobby John. Then, without skipping a beat, Bobby John quickly got to his feet and then ran out the door of the bedroom. Then, as James looked back up towards Ronnie, he continued. Let go of him. Stop, Tommy said as he stood to his feet. Leave him alone, you weakening. You're nothing compared to us. In mid-sentence, Ronnie was suddenly thrown through the air, and then towards Tommy, causing him to duck down. Instantly, however, Ronnie flew back towards the dark figure, of which Ronnie couldn't see in the first place, in hopes that he might startle it. Then, as Ronnie just hovered in mid-air, he watched over Angel and his brother, ready to attack. Seconds later, Bobby John ran into the room. Bobby! James yelled from the center of the circle. Make a solid trail of salt around the seance star and everyone within it. Without question, Bobby John did exactly what James told him, outlining an imaginary circle with everyone within it except for Ron, whom still floated above the star. Malachi! Bring Angel into the center of the star beside me. Jumping up to his feet, Malachi instantly went up to James, of which nobody had ever done during a seance, and then got down to his knees, in front of James, and then attempted to lay Angel down to the floor. Malachi! Put him on my coat, Tommy said as he pulled his police department coat off of himself. Then, with Tommy's coat now covering the floor, Malachi carefully set the small body down. As James looked back up towards the dark figure, he saw that it wasn't able to cross the line, made of salt, as it stood at its border. See? James said loudly as he stared at the evil object, we have more power than you do. In response, the darkness moved away from the circle and then towards the bedroom door. Bobby John. The kids and the girls. Then, as James turned to face Eddie, he continued. Eddie! Go get your Ouija board. Pausing as James watched Sterling and Bobby John follow the evil being out of the bedroom, James then looked back to Eddie again, whom was now holding a folded-up board that he had pulled out of his closet. In his other hand, he held a planchette. All right, Eddie. Place the board down here beside Angel. Mid-sentence, James looked up to see the darkness re-enter the room as Bobby John and Sterling both followed right behind. James. I made a circle around the kids, Lovisa, and Don D. After explaining himself, Bobby then set the salt down beside himself. Then, as James' eyes seemed to follow the darkness around the room, Eddie began to speak as he and James both touched the planchette. Who are you? Eddie spoke in a firm voice. Immediately following the question, James' eyes could be seen moving as they followed the darkness come close to the Ouija board. Simultaneously a dark object seemed to block out a portion of the green aura as James' eyes got big. As it began to seem that you could hear a pin drop within the room, the planchette began to move around, in little circles, as the response came slowly, one letter at a time. Z, Angel whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Angel's body was too weak to sit straight up, therefore he just allowed his eyes to move with the wooden board piece, E. L. Now, as Ronnie finally returned to his feet, he sat beside Malachi and looked into his face as each letter was slowly revealed, D. A. Suddenly, the planchette came to an abrupt stop. Zelda? James said out loud. Who's that? Zelda, Malachi said in a firm voice, is Angel's mother. Zelda died years ago in an accident with her husband, Robert Coleman. Zelda is also Miguel's daughter. Why are you doing this to your son? Eddie asked. With the question, the planchette, once again, began to move in circles. Simultaneously fear could be seen in Angel's face as the planchette stopped again. R. Instantly, the wooden piece began to draw circles again as it began to hover over its next letter, E. V. E. N. G. E. Revenge? James asked as he looked at Angel. What is she talking about? I don't know, Angel said as his eyes began to water. With his response, Angel then began to shake again as well. Silently, Angel's mind had gone back to a time when he had gotten into trouble for spilling soda on the seat of the car. It was an accident yet, as usual for his father, Angel even at the age of 42 months was slugged in the side of the head. Angel's father had done this before in the past and, just like in this particular episode, his mother sided with her husband and against the one person that was predestined to protect her very life. I didn't mean to spill the soda. But then my head was hurting real bad from my father hitting me. I started to kick the back of the front seat. I didn't mean to cause the accident. As Angel spoke, Malachi got up onto his knees as he also began to rub Angel's back. Through all the years that Angel had lived with them, he had never heard about the cause of Angel's parents' death. Just knowing that Angel held this tragedy on his own shoulders had caused Malachi's and Ronnie's eyes to water. Nobody had ever imagined Angel being abused like this by anyone. Much less by someone that should have loved him. It's all right, Angel, Malachi whispered quietly into his ear. Nobody will ever hurt you again. Then, as Malachi picked Angel up, off of Tommy's coat, he then held Angel's little body over his own shoulder and hugged him tightly. Instantly, all of the candles, that were at each point of the star, had all gone out at once. Then, immediately afterwards, a loud bang echoed within the bedroom as it sounded like that all of the doors and windows had suddenly slammed. Moments later, as everyone sat within the dark, the light, from under the bedroom door, suddenly turned on as everything then went back to normal. Then, within the light from under the door, the shadow, from someone's legs, casted themselves into that light. Dada! Elian's voice shrieked from the hallway. I love you, Dada. I love you too, son, Bobby John said as he simultaneously stood and turned on the bedroom light. As Bobby opened the door, he looked back into Eddie's and Angel's room, where everyone still sat in the circle. Everyone's eyes were wet, and also, the planchette had been thrown through a mirror that hung above Eddie's and Angel's dresser. As June rolled around, Lovisa was soon to give birth to her and Macaulay's second child. Though Mika was just under 16 months old, they both felt confident that they were prepared for the extra responsibility. Even with Elian and Jeffrey being within the home still hadn't shook their confidence. Then, as June 6th arrived, the whole family, once again, had found themselves in the waiting room of the hospital. Later that same evening, at 6:19, Malcolm DeClue was born. You know, Dad, Macaulay said as the two stood outside the window of the nursery, it seems like, sometimes, that our whole family is different from the rest of the world. Looking down to Macaulay, Ron had began to say something but then just paused with his mouth still open. Macaulay. We're vampires. Of course we're. No, Dad, Macaulay said as his face got a bit of a serious look on it. I'm talking about how, even as vampires, we never meet other vampires. It's like we're the only vampires on planet Earth. Macaulay. We're not the only vampires. Ron interrupted, there's others out there. We just don't see others because there aren't many of us. Also, we don't exactly go out looking either. Looking down, towards his own feet, Macaulay then paused as he thought for a moment. It's not just that, Dad. We're also the only family that has regular contact with ghosts. Hell, look at what happened to Angel a couple of months ago. His own mother, whom died years ago, tried to kill him. We can't go out into the sunlight like others do. Sometimes, people look at us weird when we go out into public. Now, as a parent, I have to wonder if my kids will ever get caught harvesting by a normal person. Macaulay, Ron said as he turned to face his son, I know that it's not easy being who we are. But that's a detail that we cannot change. Looking back into the nursery, Ron continued. I remember back when your Uncle Malachi and I were kids. Coming out of Kmart, or some other store, and having some other kid point at us like as if we were animals at a zoo. Or, always having to deal with questions from doctors. Hell, most children go home from the hospital the day that they're born, our children have to wait for a couple of days. And then, if we are dealing with a different doctor, it would be longer than just a couple of days. Looking back to his son, Ron then continued, yeah. It would be nice to be the same as others around us. But Macaulay, this is who we are and we can't change it. So, the best thing that we can do, is to take advantage of the abilities and powers that we do have to make this the best life that we can for ourselves and others. I know. I just wish, sometimes, that we could experience life just the same as everyone else around us does. Just once at least. And then what would you do? Ron interrupted. Wish even harder that you were like one of them. Or, decide that you dislike them because of their weaknesses. Macaulay. The best thing that we can do is be proud of who we are. Make friends along the way. And, live in peace. Looking up to his father, Macaulay tightly hugged him as he then also looked back, into the glass window, towards his son. You're right. Then, after he paused for a moment, he looked back to his dad again. You know. A lot of churchgoers look at vampires as evil beings. We know that, Macaulay, Ron said in almost a whisper, but the people that know us, as people, know that we're not evil. That's why we keep our vampire business to ourselves. Everyone that knows us, knows that our extended teeth are a genetic birth defect. Of which, Ron continued as he now grinned, isn't too far off of the truth. How about the doctors? They seem to always have their nose into our business. Sometime one of them will be sacrificed, Ron said as his grin seemed to instantly melt into the different features of his face. Son, that's when the tables turn. That's when we must make very serious choices in weighing in the importance of a single life over many others. That's when we harvest, that's when we show the true identity to our genetic history, and that's when we remember the importance of our silence. Without an immediate response, Macaulay then looked down towards the floor as he remained silent for at least a full minute. He hadn't thought about the fact of how true his father's words were. Even through the individual events that he personally knew of. Jason Yeesh dying at his Uncle Malachy's and his cousins, Lucifer's, hands. The death of Eric Myers by the hands of his Uncle Malachi, Uncle Eddie, and his own father. And then the death of Dr. Tom Knox, of which Macaulay had never met, that had died by his Uncle Malachi, Uncle Eddie, and his father. Macaulay personally knew that these deaths were not in vain. Yet, he also knew that this had also put a painful image onto the life of peace. With this, Macaulay also knew that it was very likely that he too would end up being in the position, one day, of taking someone's life. Looking back up to his father, Macaulay looked into his dad's eyes. I wish that there was a more peaceful way to prevent problems. Yeah. Me too, Macaulay. Ron answered as he now looked through the nursery room window. But peaceful also means increasing the risk of our devastation. And, Ron continued as he now looked back to his son. That's a risk that none of us can ever consider. As June 25th rolled around, everything, for Mr. and Mrs. William Hall, had been going as normal as Bill found himself attempting to help his son learn to walk. For the most part, Michael had been advancing at a much faster pace than most children his age. Even at the age of 6 months, Michael had a vocabulary of at least a dozen words. And now, as a commercial, on the television, had caused William to put his full attention on his son, Bill had the 6-month-old standing on his own feet as he simultaneously kept a finger shoved tightly into Michael's little fist. As it looked like that the child was about to move a foot, Michael's entire body would suddenly look as though he was gonna fall. Moments later, however, just before Mike would begin to tumble, Bill would then quickly offer his index finger, of the opposite hand, for support. As Mike would suddenly grab a hold of it, he would then look back to his father's face. Dada. Oh. You almost fell again. Didn't ya? Bill would tease, and then lightly blow into Michael's face. In response, Michael would suddenly screech and then blow a bunch of bubbles out of the side of his pursed lips. Then a little bit later, just as the television commercial ended, Bill and Michael both heard the front door of the house pop open. Is anyone home? Tina hollered through the house. In reality, Tina knew very well that her husband and son were home. However, she enjoyed hearing the sound of her son yelling. Mama. Mike screeched. Mama. Dada, mama home. Then, just as Tina walked into the living room, Michael took 2 steps towards her before falling down onto his butt. With the fall, a look of surprise covered Mike's, Tina's, and Bill's faces. Oh my God, honey, Tina said loudly. He just walked. I know, Bill said as he suddenly stood up from the couch to rescue Michael before me had a chance to cry. Instead, as he lifted his son up off of the floor, he quickly tickled the side of Mike's neck, with his unshaved face. Instantly, a smile grew across the child's face. I've been trying to work with him all morning. I guess that he just wanted to wait until you got home to actually try. Well, that's good, Tina said as she then set her purse on the counter. Would you like something else for an additional good news for today though? What do you mean? Bill asked as he held Michael's close to himself, as he had also patiently been waiting on a hug and kiss from his wife that he would usually get when she got home. Well, Tina said as she smiled, what would you think about another kid on the way? Another? Bill said as his face seemed to have gone blank. You mean, you're pregnant? Yep. Pausing as she then stretched her arms around both Michael and William, she then kissed him as a grin had stretched across his face. Who knows? Maybe now we'll have your daughter, Tina continued as she now let go of her hug. You hear that, Mikey? Bill said as he turned his head enough to speak directly into his son's ear. You're gonna be a big brother. In response, Mike pushed himself off of his father's chest, far enough, to look into his dad's face. Without a verbal response, Mike just blew bubbles as he simultaneously raised his hands into the air, like as if he was gonna applaud his father's words. Along with the bubbles, came a smile. Do you think that maybe he understood you, honey? Tina asked as she stepped back into the kitchen. I doubt it. However, it looks kinda cute when he acts as though he did understand, Bill said as he followed his wife out to the kitchen. Once in the kitchen, Tina picked up a grocery plastic bag that she must have set on the floor as she walked in just moments prior. Seconds later, Tina pulled out a bakery item that had obviously come from Safeway. What's you got there, honey? Bill pried. Your favorite. Blueberry cheesecake. With her response, Bill's face instantly began to glow as his eyes followed the package. Then, once again, Michael pushed himself away from his father as his eyes too had seen the bakery dish. Yummy, Mike shouted as he instantly stretched his arms out towards the object that had quickly found its place on the kitchen table. Immediately after setting the cheesecake down, Tina then pulled out a couple paper plates. Well, that's a good sign, Bill giggled, at least this child has good taste in food. Hopefully the next one will too. Grandpa. Angel spoke as he looked up to the man. I don't understand why my own mother, even long after she has died, would do that to me. It had been a long time since Angel had visited his grandfather. For him, it was long overdue for him to meet the old man while in the deepest phase of sleep. It had seemed, to Angel, odd that he hadn't heard at least someone, within his family, in the background of the old dungeons of which Miguel ruled. A dungeon of which Miguel lured innocent people, within his own family, as a means to either haunt or kill them. Who knows? Miguel responded as he rested his hands on his hips. Obviously she blames you for hers and your father's death. Miguel's voice was deep and very sharp. The sort of voice that you would expect to narrate a horror flick on television. In fact, to most people that knew Miguel, he was the worst sort of horror. And, once you were trapped within a dream, within Miguel's grasp, most likely you could consider yourself to be very lucky to ever awake. But all that I ever did, is react to getting hit, Grandpa. Angel persisted. I didn't provoke them. So, I spilled a little soda in the car. looking down towards the thick dirt between his feet. "I just don't." "Shut up," Miguel snapped. Instantly Angel froze, as it had been the first time that his idol had reacted meanly towards him. "If you wanna be powerful like me, Angel, you've gotta stop sniveling about everything. Damn you, Angel. Haven't you learned anything from me?" The old man continued, "Stand up straight. Speak louder and with a voice that can be known as you mean business. Stop thinking that your feelings are important." Pausing, as Angel then looked up to him with watered eyes, Miguel then tightly squeezed Angel's shoulders as the boy stood right in front of him. "How much do you think that Malachi, Ronnie, Eddie, Karina, and the rest of the family would care about you if they had known about your involvement in the people's deaths that were close to them? You killed Larry Wallace. You killed Malachi's and Ronnie's grandfather. You killed David." "I did not." "You did," Angel snapped. "You killed Bill." "I just..." Mid-sentence, Miguel suddenly slapped Angel over the top of the head, with a force that brought his small body to his knees in the dirt. "You brought him to me," Miguel hollered back as he simultaneously bent forward and picked Angel back off of the ground. Holding on to the waist of Angel's denim jeans, almost pulling the clothing off of his grandson, Miguel held Angel up off of the ground and at his own eye level as he continued to demerit his young student. "Do you really think that you can whoop my ass or something, boy?" "No," Angel cried. Mentally, Angel was worn out. He had tried so hard, for most of his life, to become just like the one person that he idolized, more than anyone else, in the whole world. Now, as he thought that he could take a piece of his personal life, that was truly bothering him, to his grandfather, with hopes of gaining some sort of knowledge that may help him cope, he was finding out, the hard way, that, even though he idolized the old man, that he would never actually be friends to his grandfather. Now, as he just dangled in the air, by the jeans that were now starting to pull against his own body weight, as he was nearly upside down, he suddenly realized that he was now in jeopardy of losing his own life as the inseam of his jeans suddenly tore, causing him to fall at least 5 feet to the ground. With his bone-crushing stop, Angel once again felt helpless. Then, just as a tear was about to let loose from his left eye, a sound could be heard, off into the distance, of someone walking within the dungeon. Almost instantly, Miguel turned and walked away from Angel and into the direction that the footsteps were coming from. Moments later, just as his grandfather was out of sight, Angel then stood up to his feet. Angel had gone to bed only wearing his jeans and boxers. Now, as he found himself to be alone, Angel looked down to the remains of the denim that only hung onto one ankle. Using his free foot, he stepped down on the material and then stepped out of the remains of the jeans. Standing within the fog-filled corridor, only wearing boxers, Angel began to tune in his hearing to the sounds way off into the distance. "Who's there?" Eddie whispered into the darkness. He knew, instantly, that he was tied up into another nightmare. What he wasn't so sure of though is who it was that he had heard scuff their feet just within a few feet from him. "It's me." Ronnie's voice finally responded, "Where the hell did you come from?" Whispering as quietly as he could, Ronnie was trying to identify other noises that were way off into the distance. Then, as he felt Eddie's hand grasp onto his arm, they both stayed close to one another as they had also crept down closer to the floor. Within the nearby shadows, they both watched into the fogged air for any signs of movement. "I really hope that we don't run into any problems tonight." "Well," Eddie responded immediately, "believe me when I say that I don't really want any problems either. Angel and I were sleeping just fine. We didn't need any assist." "There," Ronnie suddenly said as he also pointed at a shadow moving towards them. "It's Macaulay?" Ron's whisper had suddenly gotten loud as he recognized his son. Beside Macaulay, whom had stopped his forward motion at the sound of his father's voice, was his dog Kiana. "Dad?" Macaulay said with a tone of question in his voice. Instantly, Macaulay and Kiana both walked over towards Eddie and Ronnie as they still both hid, quietly, within the darkness. "How many of us are here?" Macaulay whispered. "We don't know." Eddie spoke up, "We just..." Suddenly, Eddie stopped talking as all three of them heard someone else walking from far beyond. Kiana had even heard it too, as his ears suddenly perked up and turned towards the direction that Macaulay and himself had just come from. "Obviously, we're not alone," Eddie said as he lightly grasped onto both Ronnie's and Macaulay's shoulders. Looking at the side of Kiana's face, it looked as though he was about to bark. Quickly removing his hand off of Macaulay, Eddie then reached out and pulled Kiana's collar, causing him to move closer to them, in hopes that maybe he wouldn't bark. "Shh," Eddie hissed quietly. Then, just as suspected, Miguel's face was seen walking into the dense light. As Miguel continued to move, however, he was walking into a direction that would take him right past them so long as nothing gave up their location. Instantly, just as Miguel was out of sight, Macaulay, Ronnie, Eddie, and Kiana had all simultaneously seen someone that was kneeling down by the edge of the light, where Miguel had just come from, suddenly stood and run away into the opposite direction. "Who the hell was that?" Eddie whispered. Without a verbal response, Eddie did notice Ronnie shrugging his shoulders. Slowly standing up, Ronnie carefully looked into the darkness that Miguel had disappeared into just moments prior. Then, as he looked down to Eddie, as he remained in his kneeling position, he spoke very quietly, almost impossible to hear. "I wanna know who that was." "Are you crazy, Ronnie? We could have a run-in with Miguel," Eddie whispered back. "But, if that's someone within our family," Ron answered back, "they would be safer with us." "My dad's right, Eddie," Macaulay said as he whispered lightly into Eddie's ear. "I think that taking a slight chance of getting caught would be worth making sure that, whoever that was, is safe." Though his feelings towards his grandfather were very bitter at the moment, Angel still wanted, more than anything else in the world, to be just as powerful as the old man. So Angel began to follow him. At the moment he didn't want, however, to walk with him. Then, after a long stretch of corridor that was only partially lit through the thick fog, Angel had suddenly seen a few people, and a dog, lurking in the darkened shadows. As Angel got down onto his knees within the edge of the darkness, Angel realized that he was looking at Eddie, Ronnie, Macaulay, and then Macaulay's dog. Seconds later, all of their heads turned into his direction. With that, Angel then stood back up, and then ran, as fast as he could, into the direction that he had just come from. After about a minute of sprinting down the darkened corridors, as he carefully dodged shaded areas that may have had dangerous obstacles, Angel had stopped running just as he had felt that his boxers were daring to fall down off of his hips. Now, as he continued to walk, Angel listened carefully into the distance as he had also kept a hold onto the elastic band of his drawers. As Angel continued to walk, the events that took place between him and his grandfather that evening continued to repeat themselves through his mind. He felt anger towards the old man. Angel didn't only want to be just like his grandfather, he had also wanted to be friends with him as well. Finding out, the hard way, that part of his hopes most likely would never materialize, he had felt a slight level of anger towards Miguel. Having been hit by his own grandfather, just the same as his own father had years ago, had turned the slight anger into sudden moments of hate as well. As the thoughts flashed through his mind, Angel's eyes would water up once in a while. As Angel continued to walk, he kept his ear peeled for any noise from behind him. Lovisa was a little shook when she had woken up to her husband having a nightmare. It had seemed that it was only about 2 days since his most recent one. And now today. As opposed to normal, with any of the nightmares, it was obvious that Macaulay wasn't running. He was either not moving at all or just walking slowly. By the fact that Macaulay was still breathing, however, she knew well that he was still alive. Being that there wasn't really anything to worry about, Lovisa decided that she would go and get herself a drink of water. Cottonmouth had often kept her feeling dehydrated. As she stood up, beside the side of the bed, she looked down towards their dog, Kiana, and noticed that he too must have been having a nightmare as his legs had just began to move in a way that would indicate that he was running. Simultaneously, Macaulay's legs began to run as well. This was the first time, to Lovisa's memory, that the dog had been having a nightmare at the same time as someone else. Now, with added concern, she decided to head upstairs to see if anyone else was having a nightmare as well. Before leaving the basement though, she opened the kids' bedroom door to check on them. Both, Micah and Malcolm, were just fine. Then, without further ado, she headed up the steps. Deciding to check on Eddie and Angel first, Lovisa quietly walked to the end of the upstairs hallway. Then, as she stood in front of the master bedroom, she lightly tapped on the door a couple of times before deciding to turn the doorknob. Without a response, she then opened the door and then walked in. Immediately, as Lovisa looked at both Eddie and Angel in their sleep, she saw them running as they laid on their sides facing one another. Quickly, Lovisa stepped back out of the room, leaving their door wide open, and then opened Elian's and Jeffrey's bedroom door just across the hall. Instantly, Lovisa could see that both of Don D's and Bobby John's kids were asleep. And then, in turn, closed their bedroom door before heading down to Bobby John's and Don D's room. Approaching the bedroom door, Lovisa was almost scared to find out what she would see. First, however, she lightly knocked on the door. "Yeah?" Bobby John's voice responded. "Hey Bobby John." Lovisa answered. "Can I speak to you for a minute please?" "Yep." "Just hold on a second Lovisa," Bobby said, and then, without waking up Don D, stood up, off of the mattress, and then headed to the door. "What's up?" "Bobby John," Lovisa said as she was also beginning to shake. "Macaulay, Kiana, Eddie, and Angel are all tied up into a nightmare." "I'm..." "Kiana?" Bobby John instantly questioned. "Yeah. All four of them. Would you please help me look over them? I'm worried." As Lovisa spoke, she saw, over Bobby's shoulder, that Don D was getting up out of bed. "Did I hear you right Lovisa?" Don D whispered. "Kiana too?" As she spoke, Don D was putting on her bathrobe. "Yes," Lovisa whispered back. "Well," Bobby John said as he stepped out of the room only wearing boxers, "let me take a look at Angel and Eddie first." Then, as Lovisa and Don D both followed close behind Bobby, they watched him walk up to the bed, sit down beside Angel, on the mattress, and then watched as he placed his left hand over Angel's forehead. On the floor, beside Bobby John's feet, were Angel's denim jeans that looked as though they had been ripped off of him as the inseam was completely ripped open. Being that Angel was sleeping on his left side, facing Eddie, Bobby had to reach all the way over him in order to make contact with Angel's forehead. "What's he doing?" Lovisa whispered to Don D. "He's using remote viewing to see what is happening within Angel's nightmare. To do this, he has to make the best contact as possible with the person's forehead. Watch." Turning her attention back to what Bobby John was doing, she watched Bobby close his eyes as it appeared that he had a look of deep concentration. Moments later, Bobby John's facial expressions would change depending on what he was seeing, or sensing, from Angel's point of view. "He's walking," Bobby said out loud, "nobody else is near him. And he's upset about something. Not scared, just upset." Moments later, Bobby John opened his eyes as he then removed his hand from Angel's forehead and reached over towards Eddie. After gently laying his hand on Eddie's forehead, Bobby John, once again, closed his eyes tightly as he began to repeat what he had just done to Angel. "Here they are," Eddie said. "Ronnie, Macaulay, and Kiana are with Eddie. They're walking slowly. They can't hear anything, or at least Eddie can't. Somehow I don't think that they're concerned about Miguel. There isn't really any stress at all." As Bobby went on and on, every step of their walk within Miguel's dungeons were revealed through Eddie's vision. After about another 10 minutes, Ronnie, Macaulay, Kiana, and Eddie had all come along the steps that led upwards on the right-hand side of the corridor. Moments later, as they rounded the front of the stairs, they had found Angel sitting on one of the steps. Through Eddie's eyes, Bobby John saw Ronnie, by himself, as Macaulay and Kiana just stayed by Eddie, go up to Angel. Shortly afterwards, Ronnie sat down beside Angel as he simultaneously placed his right arm over Angel's shoulders. In doing so, Ronnie then pulled Angel close to himself. "Hey," Don D whispered. "Angel's waking up." Just as Don D had said this, Bobby John had also seen Ronnie's arms, through Eddie's vision, seem to have fallen through Angel like as if Angel was disappearing right before them. Seconds later, Ronnie was sitting on the step alone as he looked back towards Eddie. Breaking off his contact with Eddie, Bobby John began to feel Angel moving beneath him as he started to sit up. "It's alright Angel," Bobby John said as he then wrapped his arms around the small, and nearly naked, body. Hopefully Ronnie, Eddie, Macaulay, and Kiana will be awake soon. Just relax. With his words, Angel seemed to have almost wrapped himself within Bobby John's arms as he then also closed his eyes. All within about another 20 minutes or so, Eddie too was waking up as he then found himself to be surrounded by the women of the house and then Bobby John as he was holding on to Angel. "Angel," Eddie said as he sat up in bed, "what did Miguel do to you?" "He was yelling at me," Angel said honestly. "And then he picked me up off of the ground and caused my pants to rip off of me." It wasn't very often that Angel was able to tell almost the whole truth when describing the events within Miguel's dungeon. Angel was fearing, however, if Miguel would ever tell the family about his involvement in the deaths close to and within the home. Angel didn't know for sure if he was able to trust his own grandfather. L2 City. "Go ahead City," Tom said as he was just pulling out of the police department's parking lot. With the dispatcher's call, Tommy brought the patrol car to a full stop as he remained in the parking lot. "Be advised that Chief Chuck Kibbe would like you to meet with him at the hospital. He says that it will be a follow-up to a call on December 28 of 2044. 10-4, I'll be 10-8. Tom responded and then pulled out onto the road heading north. City clear at 0432. Tommy's, and his partners, Keith Roeters, shift had gone smooth that night. No accidents, no ambulance calls. Only a few speeders and welfare checks that helped the first half of the shift go by quickly for them. "Which case is that?" Keith asked as he looked towards Tommy from the passenger seat. I don't honestly know," Tom said as he looked back to his partner. "That's like 16 months ago." Looking towards his partner, Tommy's face was full of question just as they both pulled up to the hospital. Then, as they got out of the patrol car, they saw Kibbe walking out of the front entrance. "What's up?" Keith said loudly. Simultaneously, Chuck waved for both of them to stay at the car. "Hey Tommy," Chuck said without giving further hints, "I need you to stay here at the hospital." "But..." Instantly, Chuck raised his hand to silence Tom. "Listen Tommy. Do you remember Tina Hall?" Chuck asked as he had also pulled a cigarette out of his pocket. "Ha! The lady that lives across the street from our old house?" Tom asked. "Yes. Well, she's back in here again giving birth to another child. And, Tommy, she and her husband, are asking that someone is here at the hospital during their stay." Pausing, as Chuck looked over towards Keith. "Officer Roeter, I think that you can manage the rest of your shift solo." Now, as he looked back to Tommy, he continued, "Tom, please plan on possibly pushing a double shift here at the hospital." "A double?" Tommy gasped. Though Tommy did love his job, he also looked forward to his off hours with Lucifer. A relationship that had only grown over the years. Just waiting to be by his side, near the end of each shift, was enough to make Tommy drool. "Yes Tommy. I know that you can do it. This family has personally requested that you be that officer." "All right," Tom said. "And," Chuck continued as Keith quickly sped off with the patrol car, "how about you call and have Lucifer keep you company? Who knows, it might only be a few hours down here," Chuck added. With that addition, however, Tom's spirits immediately rose. "Hey Mr. Hall," Tom announced as he approached the man just outside of the delivery room, "I'm Officer Tom Russell." "Yeah." Bill interrupted as he simultaneously brought his hand up for a shake. "You used to live across the street from us." "Yes sir, I did. Now, I'm gonna stay with you guys, and then your unborn child, until you guys are ready to leave the hospital." Pausing, as Tommy looked at the sleeping child, in a chair beside where William was sitting, he then continued. "I see that your son is doing pretty good now." "Oh yes," Bill said with a little excitement in his voice, "he's walking now and has a decent vocabulary for his age." "Well that's great. So, how is his hand doing? The last time that I had seen it, he had a lot of stitches and bandages." With his question, Tommy looked towards Michael's left hand that was partially covered with a quilt. "It's doing all right," Bill said as he also reached down to his sleeping son. Then, as he pulled the quilt off of the hand, he exposed Mike's first battle wound, The scar is kinda ugly, but that's probably because it's on the back of the hand of a 16-month-old child. Reaching down, to touch the back of Michael's hand, Tommy felt the scare that had stretched from the base of the left ring finger, horizontally across the back of the hand, and then right up to the wrist, just behind the thumb. The scar was very rigid and was purple in color, standing up off of the child's white skin. "I won't allow this to happen to your new child," Tom said as he looked back up to the man's eyes. Obviously, by the tone in Tom's voice and the look in his face, he was very serious. "I promise you, Mr. Hall." As planned, shortly after Bill finished talking with Tommy, Tom then had Lucifer come and stay with him at the hospital. Only a few hours of being at the hospital, however, at 5:54, Justin Hall was born. Then, about 7 o'clock, the newborn was taken to the nursery so that his mother could rest. "I still don't get it," Lucifer said as him and Tommy stood just inside of the nursery. "Why would an innocent child, a newborn at that, come under attack?" Sitting side by side of one another, the two had, for the most part, been leaning against one another as Tommy spoke of the pullovers that he had earlier that morning. As Tom spoke, however, Lucifer's listening had slowly turned into a physical flirtation that soon had turned into Lucifer kissing the side of Tom's neck. "You know," Tom said with as much of a serious tone that he could as he simultaneously smiled at Lucifer, "I'm supposed to be working on watching this baby." "And," Lucifer said as he only partially lifted his lips off of Tom's neck. "The baby is in his crib, the door is shut, we're beside the door, it's the only door, and your foot will prevent the door from opening." With the end of Lucifer's sentence, he quickly sealed his lips onto the side of Tom's neck. Quickly, as Tom immediately placed his foot at the base of the solid wooden door, Tommy then opened his jaws wide as he then sunk his canines deep into the side of Lucifer's neck. Instantly, Tom felt Lucifer's body slightly turn rigid before Lucifer placed his hand firmly on Tommy's chest. "Harder, Tommy," Lucifer moaned. This situation wasn't new. Honestly, just as much as when Tom and Lucifer were younger, the love, including the sexual part of the relationship, had only grown in strength. The part that had grown the most, however, was the verbal and physical flirtation. It had been through this flirtation that both Tommy and Lucifer had learned that there was no longer any properties, within each other's blood, that could either retain each other's life or internal strengths. These properties did still remain in the blood of normal people, thought of which was good for the purpose of harvesting. It wasn't just recently that they had discovered this. It was way back, after their 13th birthdays, that they had discovered it. The taste of the blood, on the other hand, still had the effect, onto one another, that was similar to an orgasm. It had seemed that only moments had passed when someone tried to enter the nursery. Quickly, Tommy whipped his foot away from the base of the door about as quick as him and Lucifer had stopped kissing one another. As the door swung wide open, it was a Dr. Kennedy, that walked in with Bill Hall just on his ankles. "Well," Tommy said as he stood up, "your son is just fine." "And I would like to thank you for that, Officer Russell," Bill said as he shook Tom's hand. Then, as he walked over to the center crib, of the 5 that were in the room, Bill gently lifted his son up out of the crib and onto his shoulder. "There you go, Justin." The man whispered into the infant's ear, "Let's go see your big brother, that hasn't met you yet, and then we'll all go home." It was those very words that Tommy and Lucifer had wanted, very much, to hear. The thought of having to spend a lot of time in the hospital, or at least more than what they already had been, considering the baby boom within their own family, was a bit revolting. Not to mention that Lucifer's persuasion and physical efforts, through the last couple of hours, had awakened certain extremities that now begged for relief. As Bill returned to his wife's side, Michael immediately perked up as his father sat down beside the bed with his little brother in hand. "Justin," Michael said as he simultaneously pointed at the baby, "Justin, my birthday?" "Brother," Tina corrected. "Justin is your baby brother," Tina continued as she watched Michael reach out towards the infant. "Be careful to not wake him up." "Justin sleeping?" Mike asked with a cute look on his face that made both of his parents smile. "Yep. He's asleep, so be careful," Bill then said just as Michael's hand made contact with the baby's hand. All in short timing, Tina, Bill, Michael, and Justin all headed home after Bill warmed up their car. The ride only took about 10 minutes through the slush-filled streets. Then, Just as they pulled into the drive, Justin had finally woken up. As he awoke, every neighbor, within about at least 100 yards of their house, was well aware of the safe return. "Hello," Tom said as he answered his cell phone. Him and Lucifer had just arrived at home when the device began to chirp loudly through their apartment. "Hey Tommy. This is Chuck Kibbe," the older man said. "The Halls just called me, from their home, and they said to say thank you." "Well. That was no problem, sir," Tommy said as him and Lucifer both rushed into their bedroom. "In fact, I'll call over there later just to reassure them of their safety." "That's good, Tommy," Chuck said, "and, for myself, I also thank you for staying over there." "Anytime, Chuck," Tommy said as he had also playfully fought Lucifer off of himself as he was trying to rip Tom's uniform off of him. "I'll be back to work at 9 o'clock. "Oh no," Chuck said, "you can take the night off. You did your share already." "Well, thank you, Chuck." "Yep. Now you have a good evening. See ya." Moments later the call was disconnected as Tommy grinned at Lucifer. As Tommy still held the phone in his hand, he held it out to arm's reach as he located its power button. Then, as the cell phone beeped at its loss of power, Tommy dropped the phone into a full basket of laundry that laid in the corner of the bedroom. Up to this point, in Michael's life, he had always been the center of attention. It was on this night, however, even at 16 months old, that he realized that would be changing. "But I want the toy," Mike said as he watched his parents place a couple toys around the baby. Along with his words, it had looked as though he was gonna start throwing a fit. "You've got your own toys," Bill said as nicely as possible, "go bring some of your toys out here." In reality, even the baby wasn't gonna be able to play with his toys, yet at the same time, Bill decided that Mike should know, from day one, the difference between his toys and Justin's toys. So, in a crib, that Tina and Bill had bought, just before Christmas, they set Justin in the center of it and the toys around the perimeter. Moments later, Michael brought out a big block Lego for himself to play with. "Hey Michael," Tina said quietly, "how about I bring out the rest of your Legos, and then you and I can build something together?" With the words, Michael instantly dropped the one Lego that he had in his hands, and then reached out and took a hold of his mother's right index finger as he began to lead his mother to the toy box. In general, Mike was happy about now being a big brother. It was a title that he wore with pride as now his mother's idea, of playing with a bunch of Legos, led into Mike offering a couple of Legos to his little brother. To Justin, most likely he couldn't even see the Legos after his first day of life. Most likely, he probably couldn't even see his own toys either. However, when he could finally see, he would have a variety of toys to choose from. "Night-night time, Michael," Bill announced as he stood up with Justin over his shoulder. "Come on now." As Bill persisted, Michael set down his toys and then reached out with his hand as he then took a hold of his dad's. Then, once they reached the top of the stairs, Michael followed his father into the nursery room instead of his own room. "Michael. You've got your own room, bud. This is Justin's room." Just as the words came out of his mouth, Tina showed up, behind Michael, just inside the nursery room door. "Come on Michael," Tina said as she bent down to pick up the child, "I'll tuck you in." Then, as Tina stood straight up, Mike turned, within her arms, to look back at Justin. "Say night-night, Michael." "Night-night," Michael said in a slightly screechy voice as his mother had simultaneously poked him in the ribs. With the response, Michael had also smiled as he had used his arms to guard his rib cage. Now, with his face buried into Tina's chest, they left the nursery as William continued to lay the baby down. Moments later, just as Tina laid the child down into his own bed, she quietly prayed over her son. Seconds later, she then pulled the sheet and then the blanket over his chest. "I love you, buddy." Before Mike could even respond to his mother, he had already fallen asleep. Just before laying herself down to go to bed, Bill returned to the room and then laid down beside her. "You know, honey, either we are gonna wind up having a daughter sooner or later, or you'll have to finally give one of the next few kids your own name." "Well, let's call it official then. The next boy that we have will be William Hall III."